In this video, guys, I'm going to show you how to cut and sew this beautiful corset blouse. Let's get into it. So I'm starting my fabric on a fold, and I've gone ahead to put my lines. Okay, so I extended my tape by 5 inches, and the first line there is my bust point. The next line is my nipple point. The next line is my under bust point. The next line is my half blouse, and that is my blouse length. Okay, so at my nipple point is 9.5 inches, but because I'm cutting directly on the fabric, I added half an inch to my nipple point and my under bust point. So from the middle, I marked 4.5 inches as my nipple to nipple measurement. Okay, so because we are cutting directly on the fabric, we add half an inch. Okay, so my nipple to nipple measurement is 8 inches. So divided by 2, that's 4 inches, and half an inch for joining. Okay, so at the hem and at my nipple point, I took 4.5 inches from the middle, and I connected my markings together. Okay, so after connecting my markings together, the next thing I went ahead to do is at the top, which is my chest line, I marked 5.5 inches. Okay, I always do this because I don't like my dart to look like straight. Okay, when we get towards the chest. Okay, so I marked 5.5 inches, and I connected my markings to my nipple point. Okay, so after connecting my markings to my nipple point, at the hem I took 1 inch on both sides, and at my under bust point I took 1 inch on both sides. Okay, so after taking 1 inch on both sides, the next thing I went ahead to do was to connect my markings together. Okay, you guys, if you're not seeing this thing very well, I'm so sorry, because I don't know, the lighting just looks off for this particular video. Okay, so the next thing now I went ahead to do was to connect my nipple point to my under bust point with a curvy, well, I say curvy line, but you guys get the drill. Okay, so I connected my nipple point to my under bust point. Now at my chest line, which is that line there, I took half an inch on both sides. Okay, I took half an inch on both sides. Now after taking half an inch on both sides, I connected it back to my nipple point. Okay, so I connected it back to my nipple point. Very simple, very straightforward. Okay, so now after doing this, the next thing I went ahead to do was to mark my shoulder point. So my shoulder point is 8.5 inches, and at my bust point I took my bust at 9.5 inches. Okay, so now after taking my bust at 9.5 inches, you guys know we are going to cut that part out, so I added it back to my bust measurement. So after doing all this, I just connected my shoulder point to my bust. Okay, so this is what we have here. So now what's the word? I took circumference of my under bust divided by 4. I marked it, and that point I'm going to cut out. I added it back at the hem. Because this is a corset, I wanted to maintain, I wanted it to snatch my waist, so I took my waist measurement at the hem, and that part I'm going to cut out. I added it back. So my circumference of my other bust divided by 4 is 8 inches. Circumference of my waist divided by 4 is 8 inches. So I added all the allowance I'm going to cut out. I added it back to my measurement. Okay, so now the next thing I went ahead to do was to add 2.5 inches sewing allowance. Okay, I added 2.5 inches sewing allowance back to this dress, and the next thing I went ahead to do was to connect everything together. See guys, because of the kind of measurement I have, of my side measurement looks a little bit straight, but it's not. Okay, so at the side I went up by 1 inch because I want to taper, I want to shape the side of the blouse. So I went up by 1 inch. I connected my markings together at my main measurement and the zip allowance. Then see that part where the bustier is starting from. I marked 0.5. I marked 1 cm, and I'm going to connect it to that 1 cm mark because I want it to be accurate. If I just connect it directly, it's not going to align properly when I'm sewing it. Okay, so that 1 cm mark there is the 1 cm I'm going to use to join the sides. Okay, so which is what I did there. Now at the center, I came down by 1 inch, 1.5 inch, and of course I connected it from that 1 cm mark to get this basket bascule waistline going on there. So for that bascule waistline, I went down by 1.5 inch, remember. So we are basically done with the front part. Okay, so something I'll tell you to do is when you want to draw your, that's this armhole we drew, I'd advise you go down by 1 inch from that bust point. Okay, because it affected the final look of my blouse. So when you want to shape out your own arm, I always do this, but the day I was cutting this clothes, you guys, I was feeling so sleepy and I didn't step my armhole down by 1 inch. So if you want to cut yours, remember to step your armhole down by 1 inch before you insert the armhole curve. Okay, so now after cutting, I told you guys I was very sleepy, so there are even some things I forgot to do. Anyways, I forgot to shape, you see that side, I forgot to shape it out, but I did that later on. Okay, so this is the front part. Now it's time for the back. Just like we did for the front, I extended my tape by 5 inches and I marked my bust point at 8 inches, my nipple point at 10 inches, my under bust point at 13 and half inch at 14 inches, my half blouse at 16 inches, and my blouse length at 20 inches. Okay, so the first thing I went ahead to do was to mark 1 inch for my zip allowance. So now after marking 1 inch for my zip allowance, I connected everything together. Okay, so after connecting everything together, the next thing I went ahead to do was to tag it zip allowance. Okay, so after tagging it zip allowance, the next thing I went ahead to do, see, this my tagging took time. Oh. I don't even know why I took time tagging. That's if you guys don't know. So now from the middle, I marked 4.5 inches for my dart point. Okay, so I marked 4.5 inches for my dart point and I connected everything together. So how you know your own dart point is your nipple to nipple measurement divided by 2 plus half an inch. That's if you are marking directly on the fabric. If you're not marking directly on the fabric, there's no need for the half an inch. Okay, so at my under bust point, I marked half an inch on both sides. Okay, at my under bust point, I marked half an inch on both sides. Now the next thing I went ahead to do was at the top, I marked half a cm on both sides. Okay, half a cm on both sides, and at the bottom too, I marked half a cm on both sides. So half a cm is 1 mm. Okay, so which is what I did at the bottom as well. So after doing this, the next thing I went ahead to do was to connect all my markings together. Okay, so I connected my chest line to my under bust point and then to the hem. Okay, so now after doing this, I went ahead to do same thing for the other side, and this is how I marked out the dart for the back part. So now from my zip allowance, I marked my shoulder point at 8.5 inches, and I took my circumference of my bust divided by 4 at 9.5 inches. Okay, so which is what I marked there. You guys know that this dart that we drafted out, so we are going to cut it out. So that place we are going to cut out, I added it back to the measurement so everything will be accurate. Okay, so after doing this, I just went ahead to connect all my markings together. Okay, so now after to connect all the markings together, that's for the armhole. Okay, so now you guys know that for the front part, we took half an inch on both sides at the top. So we want to make sure that the width of the chest line on the front and the back is the same. So which is what I did here. I measured what half an inch is, like 1 inch. So whatever the width was left, I just shaped it back again so that I will have accurate measurement at the armhole. That's for the width of the chest line. So after doing this, the initial armhole line is no longer needed, so we're just going to erase that, and we have the one we just drafted out now. So this is what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. The next thing I went ahead to do was to mark circumference of my under bust divided by 4. I marked it at 8 inches and I added back, that part we're going to cut out. I added it back to my measurement. I also marked circumference of my waist divided by 4. At the hem, I marked circumference of my waist divided by 4, and the distance between those 2 points, I added it back. Okay, so now I was just verifying my measurement here again because I did not want to cry premium tears. Okay, so now the next thing I went ahead to do now was to add 2.5 inches sewing allowance. Okay, so I went ahead to add 2.5 inches sewing allowance. After adding 2.5 inches sewing allowance, the next thing I went ahead to do was to connect all my markings together. Okay, so now after connecting all my markings together, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we have here. Very simple, very straightforward. There's no plenty serere. Let me sound like so I went ahead to target center, side front, and center back and side back. And just like we did for the front, I also went ahead to shape the sides of the back. I went up by 1 inch at my main measurement, and at the zip allowance I made sure I kept it straight. Then from that line, I marked 0.5 inch. After marking 0.5 inch, and I connected it back. And I told you guys that the reason why I'm not 0.5 inch, I marked 1 cm because I always join on 1 cm sewing allowance for my dad. So I marked 1 cm. After marking 1 cm, I went ahead to connect it to have this curvy waistline going on here. So after doing all this, the next thing I went ahead to do was to cut it out. See, one thing I'll tell you guys, if you are feeling sleepy, don't cut your dress, because I made a lot of mistakes, especially for the front part. I made like, but there were mistakes I could correct. Okay, like not shaping the side. I later went ahead to shape it as for the front, but the major one was not stepping down my armhole, that's my bust point by 1 inch when I wanted to shape my armhole. Okay, so this is what the back part looks like. You see, I almost forgot the side for the back, but I remember this time. So I tagged it, and I went ahead to cut fabric strip of 11 inches in length and 3 inches in width. So it is time to sew this outfit. Okay, so the first thing I went ahead to do was to put possible interface. You always want to make sure you do that. Now the next thing I went ahead to do, that's for this front part. I'm starting with the front. I'm going to align it on each other like this. Okay, I aligned it on the center front like this, and I took it over to my sewing machine. Whatever you do to the main piece, remember to do it to the lining. Okay, so I took it over to my sewing machine, and I attached my center side, my side front to my center front. I don't know why I keep missing these things, but you guys get the drill. I attached the pieces of the front together, and this is what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. The next thing I went ahead to do was to mark out where my boning channel they're going to be. So from the center, I marked 1.5 inch. Okay, 1.5 inch at the top, 1.5 inch at the bottom. So for the side, I took 1 inch from that sewing allowance. Okay, so 1.5 inch, 1.5 inch, then 1 inch from the side, and I'm going to create my boning channel with my bias. And yes, that was my baby. Okay, so I created my boning channel with my bias by just top stitching my bias on those lines that I've marked out. You can see I also placed bias on my sewing allowance because I also wanted my boning to be there. So now this is the lining piece, and for the lining piece I want to insert my cup on my lining piece. So this is the cup I'm going to insert on the lining piece. If you don't know how to insert your bra cup to a bustier, I have a detailed tutorial on how to do that. Okay, so now remember I told you guys that I cut out two strips, that is 11 inches in length and 3 inches in width. So the next thing I went ahead to do was to fold it, and I took it over to my sewing machine to join it by the sides. Okay, so now this is me joining it in my, so is it in or on my sewing machine? You guys should choose one. Okay, so I joined it on my sewing machine. I joined the both of them on 1 cm sewing allowance. Okay, so after joining, this is what we have here. I gave it a good, I turned it over and I gave it a good press. Now the next thing I went ahead to do was to top stitch, to kind of reinforce the strip, because this is going to be more like our sleeve. Is this our strap? Okay, so I went ahead to top stitch it on both sides. So I took it back to my sewing machine. I didn't leave the sewing machine, but I took it back to where I can sew on my sewing machine, and I just top stitched both sides. Okay, for the both straps to further reinforce it, to give it more strength. Okay, so this is what we have here. So now we're going to attach the strap before we attach the boning. So from, you see that my armhole point, I went in by 1 cm. Okay, from my armhole point I went in by 1 cm, and I did same thing for the other side. From that my armhole point I went in by 1 cm. Okay, so now if my voice is low, you guys, I don't know, I can't shout, just manage me like that. Okay, okay, so I went in by 1 cm and I marked it. So you guys, you're also going to mark it in front as well if you're not using a fabric pen that will show on the other side. So wherever that mark stopped, right, I attached my sleeve and secured with office pin. Okay, so how we are going to do it, we are going to first of all sew the strap, then we are going to attach the lining. So I took it over to my sewing machine and I attached the strap to my main piece. Okay, I don't know why my thread decided to cut, but here we are. So now after attaching the strap, the next thing I went ahead to do was to attach, okay, the lining to the main piece. And if you guys know me, when I'm attaching my facing, when I'm attaching my lining, I always like to do it from my main piece and not from the lining. Okay, so after attaching the lining to my main piece, the next thing I went ahead to do was to top stitch the lining so it doesn't puff. Now something I want you guys to do is don't forget to use your hemming gum, because I forgot to use mine and I did not like the final outcome. Okay, so now this is what we have here after top stitching and giving it a good press. Now the next thing I went ahead to do was to flip it over, because we want to turn over the armhole. Okay, so now you see that 1 cm mark. Okay, that 1 cm mark. The next thing I went ahead to do was to measure 1 cm throughout the armhole, because that is what we are going to be sewing. Okay, so I did this for both sides. I just measured 1 cm throughout the armhole. The next thing I went ahead to do was I took it over to my sewing machine and I just turned it over with the 1 cm mark. Okay, very simple. This tutorial is very simple and straightforward, guys. Okay, so now this is what I did here. So after turning it over, I flipped it over and I also top stitch. Just the same way we top stitch for the straps, I made sure I top stitch the armhole so that everything is relaxed. Okay, because if you don't top stitch it, it will be puffing out. So after top stitching, this is what we have here. So now this is the front part, very pretty. So the next one we're going to go ahead to do is to insert the boning. So I grabbed my boning piece and I just went ahead to insert it into the blouse. Now after inserting it into the blouse, of course you know that you will leave like 1 cm gap. Okay, that's for the hem. Okay, and this would give us, enough sewing allowance, enough allowance to be able to turn over the hem. Okay, so you want to make sure that you put boning in all the channels. Because I did not show putting in all the channels doesn't mean you will not put in all the channels, or put in all the channels you created. Okay, so now after I inserted boning into all the channels that I created, the next I went ahead to do was to top stitch the whole sides, the sides and the hem of the front part. Okay, so after top stitching the sides and the hem of the front part, this is what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so now after doing this, it's time to sew the back part, because the front part is already ready. So for the back, I also put a forcible interface on the back. Okay, you guys will not really see it because the wrong side of this fabric is white. Okay, so it might not really be very visible, but I put forcible interface. So I aligned the pieces of the back together and I'm just going to join it just the way you're seeing it. Okay, so I also did same thing for the lining piece. Okay, so I took it over to my sewing machine and I joined the center back and the side back together. I don't know, sometimes if I want to say center back, I end up saying side back. I end up saying center front. So if you hear me interchange them, just forgive me a bit. So I also joined the lining piece. So after joining the back pieces, this is what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. So now I want to show you I want to create the boning channel for the back, and from that my seam allowance in the middle, I marked 1 inch and I connected everything together at the top and at the bottom. And I also did this I was trying to gauge where my zip allowance would be there, and from the center there too, I marked 1 inch at the top and 1 inch at the bottom, and I drew a straight line. Now this is where my boning channel is going to be. Initially I marked 1.5 inch, but I went back to change it to 1 inch because I did not want to gamble with my zip allowance. Okay, so now these are the places where my boning channel is going to be created on. Okay, so I used my bias and I just top stitched my bias to the main piece of the back part. Okay, so I did same thing for the other side. I top stitched one side and I went ahead to top stitch the other side. So after top stitching both sides, I did same thing for the other line. Okay, so now after top stitching, this is what the back part looks like after I've created my boning channel. Okay, So now, just like we did for the front, at the armhole point, I came in by 1 cm. And I did same thing for the other side. I came in by 1 cm as well. So after coming in by 1 cm, I also made sure I marked that 1 cm in the front as well. So now the next thing I went ahead to do was to grab my front part, okay? So I grabbed my front part and I aligned it to that part where my 1 cm mark is, okay? I secured with my office pin. Then the first thing I went ahead to do was to attach my strap to the back part. Okay. So after attaching my strap to the back part, this is what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. So now the next thing I went ahead to do was to lay out my front and my back part together. You guys know that we've not turned over the top of the back part, okay? So now I grabbed my lining, I placed it on my back part just as you can see, and then I went ahead to join my lining piece and the back part together. That's the lining piece for the back part and the main piece of the back part together. So after joining, I went ahead to top stitch. I gave it a very beautiful and neat top stitch, okay? So just like we did for the front, I marked out the 1 cm sewing allowance for the armhole, and I just went ahead to join, okay, to join the lining and the main piece together. So after doing this, just like we did for the front part as well, I went ahead to top stitch the armhole, okay? So after top stitching the armhole, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we have here. So after finishing up the armhole for the back part, this is what we have here. So the next thing I went ahead to do was to insert my boning into the boning channel for the back part. Okay, you want to make sure you do this. Don't go and insert boning only the front and forget the back. Oh. If my voice is a little bit faster than the video, guys, I don't know. My editor has been acting up. It's lagging, and I really don't know what to do about it. Okay, so now the next thing I went ahead to do was to insert all my boning in the boning channel. Then I went ahead to top stitch the side and the hem just like we did for the front. Okay, so after top stitching the sides and the hem just like we did for the front, I placed the back part on each other, and I went ahead to mark out my zip allowance. Then I went ahead to sew my zip allowance. Okay, so after joining it at the zip allowance, this is what we have here, ladies and gentlemen. I made sure I gave it a good press. After giving it a good press, I went ahead to mark out my measurement, and I'm just going to sew it on those lines that I have marked out. So I took it over to my sewing machine and I joined it on those lines I have marked out. I did this for the left hand side. I also went ahead to do this for the right hand side. The lining was trying to pop out, so I went ahead to fold it. So now you guys know that our hem is raw. So just because it's raw, I got a 2-inch width strap. I went ahead to fold it. After folding it, I joined it. After joining it, the next thing I went ahead to do was to attach it to the base, that's to the hem of this corset blouse. Okay, so after attaching it to the hem of this corset blouse, I made sure I took my time so that it will be neat and well preserved. The next thing I went ahead to do was to flip it over and fold it, and I top stitch. I made sure that the top stitch was very neat because this is the hem of this corset blouse and it needs to come out neat and fine. If not, to just spoil the whole look of the blouse. Okay, so after top stitching, this is what the hem of the blouse looks like. You can see it is neat, it is sweet, it is beautiful. There's no hanging thread anywhere. You want to make sure it is neat, it is well finished. Okay, so now the next thing I went ahead to do, so this blouse doesn't have lacing. Okay, so this is what the back now is open. Okay, it doesn't have lacing. I just wanted to insert my zip. You guys know that I'm not really a corset girl and I don't like lacing, so I went ahead to insert my zip. After inserting my zip, this is what the blouse looks like. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what the finished look of this blouse looks like. Okay, remember I told you guys that I forgot to step down my measurement, and of course your girl has added weight. That's why it's folding around the armhole. But this is how sweet and easy and simple it is to make a corset blouse. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, don't forget to share, don't forget to subscribe. If you're watching from YouTube, if you're watching from Facebook, don't forget to follow my page. And I'll see you in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.